Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Okay, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash. I'm here with Zina Shevchik. We are both librarians here at the Colonie Library. This is show 26. Today we're going to have a little bit of an extended version, which I'll tell you about in a second. But if you don't know our show, the premise is very simple. Zina and I go down to the new bookshelf, and we go down to our technical services department where they're processing all the new books. And we brought a whole bunch up to tell you about, and we're going to tell you about them. And then when we're done, Peggy Mello, one of our fellow librarians, is going to talk a little bit about some brand new cookbooks. So, Zina?
All right. My first book is, there's this publisher called Arcadia Publishing, and they publish all around the country local photographic histories. And this book is called Along New York's Route 20 by Michael Till. And Michael Till is a retired university professor. He grew up, it just says he grew up on Route 20 and has had a lifelong interest in the road. What this is a collection of his personal collection of 200 postcards, historic postcards from along Route 20 in New York State. And it gives the history of Route 20 and how the New York State officials, when they were given federal highway money in the 1920s, were given the choice of what roads to designate as part of this federal highway. And they chose more rural roads rather than the main highways, as they were in 1920. And so Route 20 goes through some rural areas that you might not find in other areas of the country. And it's maintained its rural character. And the postcards are fascinating. It goes from Lebanon Valley in Columbia County all the way to Lake Erie. And I was fascinated because it shows areas where my husband grew up. My husband grew up in East Bloomfield, New York, which is south of Rochester. It has quite a few postcards from that area, and it has photographs of where my kids went to college, Geneseo, and it's just fascinating. My husband spent about an hour looking at this book last night. So it's local in that it does go through Guilderland and Schoharie County, and it goes through downtown Albany, right? Yes. Yes, it does. And
it's Western Avenue.
Right. And so it's very, very interesting, and I think that it's certainly worthwhile if you're interested in local history. And that same publisher put out a book. This was actually the New York's Route 20 was published in 2011. This other book I'm talking about was published in 2009, but we just received a copy. It's Trolleys of the Capital District by Gino DiCarlo. And Joe and I were talking just before the taping here, and he said that they recently had a program with
the author. Was here. He was here.
And it was one of the largest crowds they've had at any of our programs. So I found the downtown of the tiny little town Mechanicville, where I grew up. They show the trolleys on the main street in Mechanicville, and then it looks like the 1920s. The skirts, the women's skirts, are to the ground. So this is also, let's see, this says, as a child, Gino DiCarlo rode the buses of the Capital District over the same routes as the local trolley lines, and he's been interested in public transportation ever since. So he has this extensive collection of rail transportation photographs. So these aren't postcards. but it shows trolley lines up to Saratoga, to Cateros Park, which used to be there, from downtown Troy, downtown Schenectady, Albany, Lake George, the Adirondacks. It's fascinating to see the style of dress and all the different locales at that time. It's over a period of years. The front cover is Schenectady, downtown Schenectady, and it's fascinating to see the fashions. The long skirts, the sturdy shoes, the cloche hats, I think they call them. So this is Trolleys of the Capital District, Images of Rail, Gino DiCarlo.
Okay, yes, I think we had 150 people came. The author showed pictures from that book on the big screen.
All right.
Now also, I want to look at the Route 20 book too, because when we were kids, when we lived in Syracuse, New York for a while, sometimes we came back and forth on Route 20. So I know all those. I was looking at that. I'm going to look at that later.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. My first book, I have a biography here of Eric Hoffer. Eric Hoffer, the Longshoreman Philosopher, by Tom Bethel. Now, Zina, do you know who Eric Hoffer was?
No.
Okay. Eric Hoffer was a migrant worker, and then he ended up working on the docks in San Francisco in the 40s, started in the 40s, but he was self-educated. He always boasted about having many, many library cards, and he wrote one of the most famous and influential books.
That's why I don't know it.
I would have to say of the 20th century. The title is also a term we use a lot. It seems to be coming up a lot these days that we live in. But he's the author of the book, The True Believer. You know that book, The True Believer? And the subtitle of that book is On the Nature of Mass Movements. He studied mass movements, and he tried to come up with what is a true believer? You know, someone who believes in something, whether it's a religion, whether it's communism, whether it's socialism or whatever. And he was he read a lot of philosophy and stuff like that. And he worked on the docks for like 30, 40 years. And he lived sort of very Spartan, a little apartment, one bed, one table, and his books. And he ended up producing this book that is, like I say, very influential book, of the True Believer. And he studied, like I say, mass movements and tried to figure out, but that term is used a lot now. You know, you say someone's a true believer. That comes from that book.
Would he categorize the civil rights movement or the women's movement as mass movements, or it's more like the labor union movement?
I think it's more like things where people dedicate their lives that they're willing to die for.
Okay.
I don't know but it's more like communism, things like that, socialism. Okay. And I think he studies religions a little bit. But anyway, he had sort of a mysterious life, because no one knows anything about his life before age 35. Other than what he said. And what he said, there's a lot of contradictions out there. So the author tried to track it all down, but he wasn't too successful. A lot of people think he was an illegal immigrant, but his life as a longshoreman. He wrote a lot of books, not just The True Believer. He wrote a lot of books about on philosophy and life and everything, and a very interesting guy. He got kind of famous in the 60s, but he ended up teaching it out in California. So I'm only halfway through reading it, but it's very interesting, very fascinating. Eric Hoffer, The Longshoreman Philosopher, by Tom Bethel. Okay. Brand new book. Zina?
Okay. The next book, let's see, we've had it. No, we just got it. Maybe it's the second copy of it. Let's see, because it was just published in February. It seems like I have been hearing about it before that. It's called Bringing Up Bébé, or Bibi, One American Mother Discovers the Wisdom of French Parenting. Bébé, B-E-B-E, must stand for baby in French. It's about an American bringing up her children, 3 children in France. She's an American woman, British husband, and she has all 3 pregnancies there. And she talks about, in a very entertaining way, about the differences between American and French parenting, concentrating on French parenting. She comes from a background of being a journalist at the Wall Street Journal, and so she's already had a career by the time she marries and moves to France. And she never expected to move to France. She didn't know French. the language or the customs. And she, I guess she's written a previous book about adultery in France, in French culture versus American culture. And so I'll have to try that book as well. This is very well written. It grabbed my attention right from the beginning. She's a really good storyteller. She talks about how well-behaved French kids are from the beginning, even as toddlers. The broad idea is that Americans are over-anxious about parenting their children, and how French are discipline their kids, but they allow them much more independence, and they expect them to behave much more as adults, way before Americans would even consider that. And she talks about how they present new foods to children, how they strictly enforce their socialization with adults, expecting them to say hello and goodbye to everyone that comes in the room where they are. She talks about how there's no obesity problem in France with children, and how they don't snack during the day. We had a French exchange student live with us for a couple of weeks about 8 years ago, and that was true. They did not snack, and they didn't eat a lot of fast food. And it was very interesting to see what foods they chose to eat and when they chose to eat. So this is actually, it sounds dull, but it's anything but. So bringing up Bebe, one American mother discovers the wisdom of French parenting, Pamela Druckerman.
Okay, that's a very hot book, Zina.
Yes, very popular.
You know, parenting books are always very popular. I think Americans sometimes would rather read about parenting than doing it.
Yeah, well, that is true.
Now, I'm looking at my books for today. I seem to have a lot of philosophical kind of books. I must be in a philosophical mood. Here's a book that's currently on the bestseller list. I think it's still on the bestseller list. It's by Stephen Greenblatt, who wrote a really great book about Shakespeare, Will in the World. This book is called The Swerve, How the World Became Modern. And I have not read this, but I've read many reviews. I actually have it on reserve. I'm going to try and read it. I'm going to read it. This is about the famous work by the Roman philosopher Lucretius. He wrote a very famous long epic poem, philosophical poem called On the Nature of Things. I guess in Latin it's De Rerum Natura. I'm probably saying that wrong. But it was this long poem. It was lost to history, like a lot of the ancient writings were. But sometime in the 1400s, the early 1400s, someone by the name of, and I'll probably will mispronounce this, Poggio Bracciolini discovered, I guess it may have been the last copy of On the Nature of Things. And Stephen Greenblatt follows not only the course of Mr. Bracciolini, finding it, getting it, translating it, getting it circulating in the Renaissance, of course the Renaissance when all the ancient writings were all rediscovered, and how On the Nature of Things down through history has influenced many thinkers, including Galileo, Freud, Darwin, Einstein, Thomas Jefferson, etc. So very, very influential poem, or philosophy. But the book, like I say, is a story of the poem itself, how that guy got it going, I guess it's a very fascinating story. He discovered it like in a monastery among the ruins or something. And it's also sort of an explication of the actual poem On the Nature of Things. And he goes through explaining, apparently in here is one of the first ideas where they came up with atoms. And I'll tell you where the title comes from. Would you like to know what The Swerve, I'm sorry, I'm talking about two books at once, that's why I'm a little confused. The Swerve is about the book On the Nature of Things,
Okay.
which I have here, I'll talk about in a minute. But this book here, The Swerve itself, there's a big section here that looks very interesting about what that book is about. And apparently it was written in like 55 BC, so it's like an ancient writing. And some of the ideas in that, and at the time they were revolutionary, and I guess when it came out in the 1400s and they got it translated, people were going, whoa, this is all.
So that's the swerve and idea.
The swerve is all the particles hitting. So these are just some of the ideas that On the Nature of Things by Lucretius is about. Everything is made of invisible particles. Not at the time it was, I guess, a revolutionary. The elementary particles of matter are eternal. The elementary particles are infinite in number but limited in shape and size. All particles are in motion in an infinite void. So it may have been one of the first physics.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
But then it gets a little more philosophical. And again, these were revolutionary ideas in the Renaissance too.
I would think.
The universe has no creator or designer. That's big. That shocked people
blasphemy.
back then. I know. Everything comes into being as a result of a swerve. That's all these little particles hitting. And then Stephen Greenblatt explains, the book and how this book has affected everything or influenced people. The swerve is the source of free will. Nature ceaselessly experiments. It sounds kind of like evolution. The universe was not created for or about humans. That's a scary idea to some people.
Again, blasphemy.
Humans are not unique. Human society began not in a golden age of tranquility and plenty, but in a primitive world for survival. Just a couple more. The soul dies. There is no afterlife. Death is nothing to us. All organized religions are superstitious delusions. It gets worse, I guess.
This is 55
religions,
BC.
yes, religions are invariably cruel, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go on. But anyway, Stephen Greenblatt traces the poem, the long epic philosophical poem On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, how it affected all the writers in history. And it's gotten great reviews. It's on the bestseller list. It's supposed to be very good. And I guess I'll hold up, there's many translations of On the Nature of Things. We own several, but this is a new book we just bought because I read, but I can't remember where, but it was in relation to this. This is one of the better translations, or most clear or cogent, or whatever the word is. The translation's by Anthony Esselin. And there it is, Lucretius, On the Nature of Things. We have several translations here, so. The Swerve, a history of that book. Zina?
All right. No. Okay, this is a departure from what we were just talking about. This is a picture book. Lest We Forget, Masterpieces of Patriotic Jewelry and Military Decorations by Judith Price, who is the president of the National Jewelry Institute. And she's presenting here pieces of jewelry and other ornaments and decorations that are military, war related, and in a couple of cases peace related. But it's stunning pictures, and I absolutely loved seeing some of the jewelry that came out of some different wars and battles. Of course, there's a D-Day cigarette lighter, and there's pins from World War II that are airplanes, American bombers. Actually, the bombers were the earrings, and there were pins of tanks, I think, and jeeps. But there's also medals. The first Medal of Honors, American Medal of Honors. There's peace medals that were given to Indians in the West when they negotiated, when the American government successfully negotiated peace treaties with the Indians. There's Napoleon snuff boxes. It's fascinating. There's some batons of field marshals, German field marshals. There's 150 what they call artifacts, but they're calling them jewelry, obviously Jewelry Institute, and they consider them works of art. And they have curators of collections discuss the history of some of these pieces and why and how some of these pieces were created. There's a lot of Cartier and Tiffany pieces in here, but there's also average person's jewelry as well. They call them sweetheart pins and victory pins. So it goes from the Civil War in the 1800s to after World War II. I found it fascinating. Lest We Forget is from a poem by Rudyard Kipling. It says that poem is often used as a tribute in war memorials. So this was very, very different, very unusual. And as you can see, there's lots of white space, very clear photographs of the material. And it all has its history. Each of these pieces has a history. And it's not, as I said, it's not just medals. Here's the Iron Cross from Hitler's time. A lot of it is, I want to find some jewelry rather than just medals. And of course, I'm only coming across medals. Oh, gee, I'm sorry. I should have had the pages picked up. Here's the batons. Oh, this is a dog collar with medals for a dog used in military operations. And I think it said it was World War II. So there's a leather dog collar with medals for the dogs.
Okay.
So, lest we forget, Judith Price.
All right, my next book is a new book, a collection of newspaper columns by all different people all through history. Well, not all history, maybe starting in the late 1800s, right up to current. It's called Deadline Artists, America's Greatest Newspaper Columns. The book's like a tribute to the newspaper column and column writing, and it includes some of the best columns according to the three editors. They're all newspaper men, two are columnists. John Avalon, Jesse Angelo, and Errol Lewis. It's sort of the newspaper columnist, sort of a dying art, but this book collects some of the most famous in America's history by such people as Ainshell Mencken, Ernie Pyle, Dorothy Thompson, Mary Kempton, Jimmy Breslin, Orson Welles, Will Rogers, Hunter Thompson, and then more currently, I think, David Brooks, Peggy Noonan, Thomas Friedman, Steve Lopez, et cetera, et cetera. And I was just skimming through this. George Will is in here too, but it's like 150 years worth of American columns. The interesting thing about them is when you read them, they were written at the time. So if you're reading something from World War I or World War II, you really get how people felt without looking back. So it's very interesting. And they're divided up into certain categories: war, politics, sports, and the sports one has a lot of our famous sports writers all through history: Red Smith, Thomas Boswell, let's see, Peter Gammons and all those, if you know the sports. Humor, crime, civil rights, local voices. I think there's some more local columns that became, a lot of times columns become famous. Hard times, farewells, the pursuit of happiness, and things like that. Oh, Dave Barry is in the humor. I'm sure you know him. So this looks like a really interesting collection if you like newspapers and the art of the newspaper column. And speaking of newspapers, I have another item here. It's not a book, Zina, but it is a new item, so I feel it qualifies.
Okay.
Has to do with newspapers.
Yep, that's good.
This is the brand new, we just got it at the library. It's a documentary called Page One, inside the New York Times. It's all about what's going on now in the newspaper world, particularly the New York Times, with everything going online and loss of advertising and how journalists are going about their business now, real journalists as opposed to what bloggers, they call it bloggers and things like that. It's a really interesting movie. They filmed a lot of it when, right in the newsroom when, for example, there's a part in here when the WikiLeaks thing was coming out.
Oh,
and WikiLeaks, how they just threw all this stuff on the internet, and all the New York Times people, they're trying to do it the journalistic way of trying to get sources and things. It's real, we got to check. So there's all this back and forth, and part of the argument was actually the New York Times guy saying, look, we're arguing, they're putting all this stuff out there. So it's all about the future of newspapers and all the scenes between the editors. I think they're filmed right there. Very interesting if you're interested in newspapers and the future of newspapers. It's a short documentary, about an hour and a half. It's a documentary, Page One, inside the New York Times, and Deadline Artists, America's Greatest Newspaper Columns. So the future of the newspaper here. We got the past and the future here.
And I definitely have the past. This is a 10.5-pound book, The Louvre. All the paintings by Eric Lessing and Vincent Pomerada.
All the paintings in the Louvre?
All the paintings in the Louvre. This is the official catalog, official record. It has almost 3,000 paintings in it. that's in the permanent painting collection at the Louvre in Paris. The photos are taken by a world-renowned museum photographer, and I have to say the color is amazing. They actually highlight 400 pictures where they actually have extensive discussion and description of the painting and how it was painted and the context of the time in which it was painted. I enjoyed this one. This is called Portrait of Anne of Cleves by Hans Holbein the Younger, and it talks about her as the fourth wife of King Henry VIII. The union lasted only a short while as Henry soon grew tired of his wife. And then it talks about the choice of the parchment for the official portrait. It just talks about how long she lasted before she was killed.
So every painting is annotated, kind of?
Yes. Well, 400 paintings are highlighted with long descriptions,
Okay.
but every single painting has its size and where it is in the museum, and it has a number on it that corresponds with. I'm not sure. I have to, it must be the catalog number, but it gives the year, the painter, the exact dimensions, like it'll say oil on canvas, the kind of painting it is, and even though I'm not picking the right colors, the colors are outstanding. Let's see if I can show that. It is a heavy book, but it's worth it. It says, in the introduction, it mentions that when color photography was invented, some thought paintings in museums would be rendered obsolete, and all I could think of was about the e-books.
Oh, yeah.
And how people are saying the printed book is obsolete. But in the last 15 years, the number of visitors to the Louvre has doubled. So they're not, the history of painting is still a big draw to the museum, and I highly recommend this book. It's the first official record of all the paintings in the Louvre. My daughter's been there, and she said you have to have a plan because it's so big.
Oh, okay.
So like this is a way you could plan what you wanted to actually see in person and know a little bit about the painting before you walk in and plan your day with the maps in this book as well. So the Louvre.
Okay, so you're saying attendance at the Louvre has doubled in the last...
It says it's doubled
in the last...
in the past 15 years. It had a number, but I didn't write that down.
People still want real things.
They want it, yes.
Like the newspaper.
Yes, they don't want to just look at it on the computer. That's the other thing. You could see these paintings on the computer.
Maybe people will not want the books on the computer.
Yeah, let's hope.
Now, here's another book. I couldn't resist talking about this book. I'm back to the philosophy here, but this is the kind of book I love looking at and reading parts of. I've only skimmed it, but the title alone will give you a good sense of what it is. And it's called 50 Popular Beliefs That People Think Are True. It's by Guy Harrison. He's a self-proclaimed skeptic, and he wants people to be skeptical of everything, and he wants people to analyze things using rationality and science. But some of the things in here are just, a lot of them are more metaphysical, what you'd expect about angels and death and religion and things. But there's a whole section in here on things like, for example, and people actually believe this. This is why, for example, that NASA faked the moon landing, that Area 51, a UFO landed in the 40s. And he's very respectful. He says in the beginning, he's very respectful. He's just trying to get people to look at it rationally and with some skepticism. And at the end of each section here, it's a big book, he gives a whole bibliography of other places to look for more information on it. So I'll read you some of these, and you'll get the idea. I've read a few. It's kind of, he uses humor, but it's kind of a serious book. So you got a whole section about supernatural and paranormal. ESP is real. Nostradamus saw it all coming. So things like that. I have to laugh at those. NASA faked the moon landings. Ancient astronauts visited us. Remember Chariot of the Gods. So a space crash, a flying saucer crash at Roswell, etc. I'll just read a couple more. Then some are very serious. You know, the Holocaust never happened. There are people.
Yeah, I was wondering. That was what my question was.
That's
whether they
in
covered
here.
The Holocaust.
You know, astrology is scientific. Most conspiracy theories are true. So he goes through. He looks at conspiracy theories in general. So he goes through. There's a whole section on religion. I won't get into that. There's a whole section on medical things. For example, alternative medicine is better. There's a whole chapter on that. No vaccines for my baby. Some people believe that. They found Noah's Ark. Ghosts are real and live in haunted houses. But again, he tries to, Atlantis is down. Atlantis is down there somewhere. And then Bermuda Triangle and all that stuff. So, here's one. That's good for this year. You probably heard of the Mayans, right?
Yeah.
Apparently, at the end of 2012, this year, the world's going to end. So he has
12.
So this chapter is called "The Mayans Warned Us." It's all over on December 21st, 2012.
Oh.
So.
It's not 12 for some reason.
So anyway, this book looks very interesting. It's a skeptic's look at 50 popular beliefs that people think are true, but I guess I should say some people think are true. Like Nostradamus.
So he debunks all of them?
Well, he doesn't debunk them.
But
he asks questions about, you should be skeptical. When someone says Nostradamus predicted the Gulf War in 1990, you got to be a little skeptical of that. And he shows you why you shouldn't believe that, and he tries to give you sources. And he tries to give reason why it couldn't be true.
So, all right. So he's being a rational approach.
Yes, and he takes everything on. So do you have one more book before we talk about cookbooks?
Yes,
okay.
One more book. This is called The Story of English in 100 Words, and it's the story of the English language in 100 words. And he is, the author is David Crystal, and he is how do they explain what he is? He's the foremost expert on English, and he's a professor in Wales. So he's published articles in forensic linguistics, and Shakespeare, liturgy, so he has a broad background. But I loved his choice of words. Now, he said that there's been lots of books written about the development of the English language, but he chose to pick out 100 words, and he says it's his personal choice, and the next person would pick a different 100 words. But each word has at least a page or two, sometimes three, explaining about its place in the development of the English language. And the first word is roe, R-O-E. The 5th century, in the 400s, they found a deer hoof that was had the word roe written in a runic language, I guess, what it was called, runic alphabet then, and in a cemetery. And they think it is referring to the fact that it's naming what it is, the bone of a roe deer, whatever that is. And it's a small deer, R-O-E, roe deer.
Why didn't they have the word deer on it?
Well, it was written in slightly different format.
I'm just kidding.
The actual name of the language is first used or recorded in a written form in the 10th century. The word English comes from Anglo, which is from Angles, A-N-G-L-E-S, which is a Germanic tribe that came over to Britain in the 5th century. Now, I learned all this reading this book because I have no background in English language, certainly history, or in British history, European history. So this was fascinating. So the Anglo-Saxon, the Anglos, were from a Germanic tribe that came and kind of took over parts of Britain when the Romans left in the 5th century. But what I found fascinating about this book was the words he chose, and I'll start from the contemporary side. The 100th word is Twittersphere. The 99th word is unfriend. Those are both obviously from online communications. The 97th word is muggle, which I believe is from Harry Potter.
Correct. Yes, that's from Harry Potter.
The 96th word is Sudoku, which is the puzzle, the number puzzle. 94th is LOL for laughing out loud, which they use in, again, an online communication. Then they have words like Alzheimer's. He picks out, let's see.
Wait, these are the words he thinks
he thinks trace the development of the English language. And I mean, it's
like your book last month, the 100 items.
Right, the history of the world in 100 objects. And for the layperson, I think it's a really fascinating way. I would never pick up a book on the history of the English language. But this is in rough chronological order, and they have the words garage, potato, taffeta, tea, fop-doodle. I don't know what fop-doodle is. The word jail, the word bridegroom, the word riddle. So, I mean, it's written in a in layperson's language, a regular, it's written for us public librarians, public library patrons, and lots of white space, big spaces, big print. The story of English, the English language, in 100 words.
Okay, thank you, Zina. Okay, now we're going to hear about some cookbooks, and today we have one of our fellow librarians, Peggy Mello, who's the head of technical services. You hear me in the beginning of the show each week, or each time we do this, where all the books are processed. So Peggy is also the head of technical services, and she orders books for our library in health and medical and cookbooks, which we're going to hear about, and our computer books. And as a librarian, Peggy will testify to this, we always go to other libraries when we're not here, right, Peggy? And I would just like to say our cookbook section is excellent, and Peggy picks all our cookbooks. So she's going to tell us about some new ones that you will find on the new bookshelf. So Peggy?
Thanks, Joe. I got to say, I mean, it's difficult to choose cookbooks. I have $2,000 a year to spend on cookbooks, and there is always a plethora of.
They're very popular. They're
the catalogs.
They're a high circulating area of our library also.
Oh, that's true too. So it's difficult to narrow down what's the one that I really want to buy, and some of it has to do with, is the person well known? Mm-hmm. Are they a famous chef? Are they on the Food Network, or do they have a cooking show? And then I kind of go from there. But I got to tell you, the first book I wanted to talk about really blew me away. How to Cook Everything, The Basics by Mark Bittman. And he's done a number of books called How to Cook Everything. But really what he's focusing on in this book is the basics of cooking. There are actually 1,000 photos in this cookbook. I mean, I don't know how they did it. How do you do that? The first thing.
You're saying he has other books in the series?
Yes.
Like how to cook everything.
All of his books are called How to Cook Everything.
Then follow. Okay.
And then the subtitle is something particular that he's focusing on. But for instance, like he talks about egg basics, and you would think, what does that really mean? But, he has photos of, let's say, a boiled egg, what a 3-minute egg looks like and what the consistency is, a 5-minute soft-boiled egg and what that consistency is, the 7-minute egg, the 9-minute egg, the 11-minute egg, and how when you're doing the hard-boiled, what the technique is, exactly how many minutes, and then you put it in the ice bath when you're done with the hard-boiled egg. And I guess everyone has their own methods, but he talks about from the very beginning, like buying eggs. How do you buy eggs? How do you crack the egg?
So this is the most basic of all the cookbooks.
Well, absolutely.
Okay.
Because he's kind of like Alton Brown, where he really goes through sort of the physics of the cooking and the chemistry and how it really works. But he breaks it down for all of the things that you cook. So pasta basics, how to cook pasta. So he's telling you exactly how much water to put and how much salt per gallon. Okay. And in case anybody out there uses oil when they cook pasta, you're not supposed to use oil when you're cooking pasta.
I put a little in the water.
You're not supposed to. And And then he tells you, what to do while the pasta is cooking. Start tasting after 5 minutes. Reserve a cup of the liquid so that you can add it to the sauce. That will make a thicker, nicer sauce. And then the 3 pictures of, is it done yet? So there's a farfalle pasta, and they're saying, well, this is what it's like when it's undercooked, and then the al dente, what it feels like on your tooth when it's the perfect, and then what the overcooked pasta looks like. So, and of course, he also gives you recipes on how to cook things.
Oh, okay. So the book has recipes too. Oh, that's
yes,
okay.
It does. So vegetable basics, I found this very interesting. I mean, how many times do people cook veggies and they just don't have taste, or they're just not cooked right? So he gives you the 10 easy toppings for any plain cooked vegetables. Then the picture of the different consistency of vegetables: the raw, the barely cooked, crisp, tender, soft, super soft, and mushy. But basically, what he does is he breaks down vegetables into groups, and he says, if they're greens, then this is how you treat them. If they're tender, then this is how you cook them, or if they're hard. So then tells you, the spices and all that stuff.
Well, that looks like a pretty good book.
The beef basics. I mean, obviously, I could spend all the time just on this cookbook, but he gives you temperatures and photos of each degree of doneness of, let's say, a steak.
Yeah.
So he'll do rare, medium, medium well, and well done. You may as well throw it in the garbage if it's well done. Anyway, and what the cooking temperature is.
Oh, okay.
And basically, the real method of cooking is, you're using a thermometer and you're testing the temperature of what you're cooking. And he disagrees with the FDA, saying, you have to cook chicken to this temperature, because if you cook chicken to that temperature, it is never going to taste good. So then he talks about the cooking methods for each kind of meat. So the roasting is the sirloin, the rump roast, the round roast, etc. And then what's good for grilling, what's good for braising and slow roasting, etc. So it's really talking about it from the beginning.
Okay. Now, how many? Is that a big book? How many pages is that book?
I don't know.
Anyway,
486.
All right, that looks like okay.
Now, the burger. What he says to do, he gives you a recipe for the burger, is you get 1.5 pounds of boneless chuck steak, and then you pulse it in a food processor. And that is how you get your ground beef. So forget about trying to buy the ground beef in the store, because that's not what you do. And you don't really smush the beef too much. Do not mash or knead the beef. Then you'll have a tough hamburger. And then how to flip the burgers. If you press on the patties, all the juice will come out, so you can't press on the patties. And then, what cheeses should be used, what cheeses should not be used, and then different cooking methods, pan-cooked, seasoning with rosemary, sage, or basil, etc. So makes you want to make a burger. And then he talks about the chicken preparations and what the lingo really means: natural versus free range versus organic versus heritage or local. And then the grilled cheese, of course. I mean, doesn't everyone love the grilled cheese? And tells you to only use slicing cheese or cheese that you're grating. Do not use pre-grated cheese or, let's say, American cheese that's already sliced, because you will not get a good outcome. Okay. So then he's telling you how to flip the sandwich, what are your cheese choices, etc. So.
All right, that looks like a pretty thorough book, Peggy.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I could have spent all the time just on that book. Okay. The next book I want to talk about is the Williams-Sonoma Soup of the Day. So, since there are 365 days in the year,
There's 365 recipes?
there's 365 recipes,
Okay.
and each recipe is a day of the year, and depending on when that day of the year is, that's the kind of recipe
Okay.
that they suggest. So it's based on the season. Now, January 7th is the Avgo Lemino. I absolutely love this soup, which is basically the chicken broth, white rice, egg yolk, lemon juice, lemon zest, and that's it.
Okay. Hold the cover up so people can see the cover.
So,
Okay, Soup
Soup of the Day
All right.
by Williams-Sonoma. And then, since I'm Portuguese, I have to choose the recipe that has the linguiça in it. March 25th is the 3-bean soup with linguiça. Dried pink beans, cannellini beans, and chickpeas, onion, celery, red pepper, chicken broth, and the linguiça and tomatoes.
All right. Well,
You gotta love it. Where are we? July 16th? We're at the farmer's market, aren't we? So July 16th is the chunky heirloom tomato and basil soup. So you
Okay.
go and you buy your heirloom tomatoes at the farmer's market, and you get your 6 tomatoes and your olive oil, yellow onion and garlic, chicken broth, heavy cream, chopped basil, and there's your soup. But you blend half of the tomato mixture, and in the food
Yeah.
processor, and then so you still have some chunky consistency
All right,
to it. And then November 18th, orecchiette sausage and broccoli in broth. Isn't that what you want in the middle of
all those
November?
soups, all those soups sound good.
Chicken broth, red pepper flakes, Italian sausage, broccoli. And these are really simply done. It's not anything complicated. A lot of it is stuff that's already in your pantry.
Okay.
Okay, let's do, the next one is Nina Simon's Simple Asian Meals. And basically, there is an idea in the Asian world of yin and yang. Those dominated by yin tend to be thin, pale-faced, sensitive to cold, and listless. Those dominated by yang are overweight, not sensitive to cold, and easily constipated. I'm sorry for adding that, but that's what it says.
That's okay.
And basically, if you're dominated by either of those, then you need to choose a food that is rich in the opposite to balance it. You need to balance yourself. So basically, they have warming and cooling foods. So if I'm a yang, I need the yin cooling foods, such as
So that's a
vegetables
that book
and
has some philosophy in it, you're saying.
And then if you're a yin, then you need the yang food, the warming foods, the beef, lamb, etc. So, and this lists all of those items, and they document the quote-unquote Asian pantry. So what are all of the different things that you need in your pantry to be able to cook these? And they talk about soup pots, salads, stir fries, grilling. They address fabulously the whole grains, the stews, the vegetarians, and the sweets. So the warm roasted vegetable quinoa salad with fennel bulbs, red onions, baby carrots, and an optional baked tofu. 1 cup of quinoa, olive oil, and water, and then the flavorings and the dressing. And there's your quinoa salad. Doesn't it sound fabulous?
Yes.
The 5-spice pork tenderloin. Basically, you get the tenderloin, the soy sauce, the rice wine, fresh ginger, minced garlic, and sugar, sesame oil, red pepper flakes, and then the 5-spice powder. The 5-spice powder is the star anise, the cinnamon, and the fennel, which aids digestion. So, and it's pretty simply done. Simply Cooked. They give you the basic recipes for the whole grains, such as the brown rice, the kasha, the bulgur, cracked wheat, quinoa, and wheat berries.
Okay.
And the last thing that I thought sounded great, the ginger chocolate covered ice cream bonbons. So basically, you're separating the ice cream into balls. You're freezing it in the ball shape, and then you're combining dark chocolate with candied ginger, and then you're coating it over the ice cream. So.
That has a dessert section. Okay.
Yes,
now, do you have
does.
one more cookbook there, or?
Yeah. I don't know who's familiar with Weight Watchers, but basically, Weight Watchers, they have a point system where each person has a certain number of points that they're allotted a day. And they came out with the One Pot Cookbook, which is basically, pot is used loosely, I guess. It could be a bowl, a skillet, a wok, a saucepan, a Dutch oven, casserole dish, slow cooker, etc. But some of these recipes they've come up with, I can't believe that these could possibly be keeping within the point limits. But the lobster macaroni and cheese is 8 points. The pork loin Asian style is 5 points. The spanakopita is 5 points, and the dried
all the
fruit
recipes,
galette
all the
is 5
recipes
points.
follow the Weight Watchers point system.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
well, that'd be a good book for people.
and they tell you per serving the calories, the fat, the saturated fat. But how do you make a lobster mac and cheese with 0 trans fat? I just can't believe that they could do this. But basically, they're choosing, their reduced fat cheese, the fat-free milk, the whole wheat macaroni, etc.
Okay.
And somehow that turns out to be much better for calories and everything.
All right.
So, Weight Watchers, One Pot
All right.
Cookbook.
Well, thank you, Peggy, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And for joining us on our extended version here of So Many Books, So Little Time. And we will see you next time.